Good evening, everyone. My name is Kathy Sullivan. I'm the Director of Professional Learning at Hill Learning Center in Durham, North Carolina. I am so glad you've joined us at Hill tonight. For those new to Hill, we are a K through 12th grade education nonprofit committed to one vision, that students with learning differences and attention challenges receive the instruction and support they need, regardless of where they attend school or whether they have a formal diagnosis. One way we live out that vision is through Hill Connect. This free webinar and event series that you're attending this evening, it's designed to help families, educators, and professionals support students who learn and think differently. Tonight's webinar is made possible thanks to the generous support of Calhoun Psychology. Recently recognized as Midtown Magazine's best mental health provider, Calhoun Psychology partners with families, schools, and communities to deliver research-backed assessments, therapy, and support in the Durham community. We're grateful for their partnership and support. A few quick notes before we get started tonight. Tonight's session is being recorded. Tomorrow, you'll receive the recording, slides, and a short survey. Please take a few minutes to complete that survey. Your feedback really helps us shape future sessions. This presentation will last about an hour, and we're going to follow it up with a Q&A. And you can share your questions for that Q&A at any time using the chat feature in Zoom. And now it's my great pleasure to welcome our speaker. In her years of school-based and clinical practice, Dr. Peg Dawson has worked with thousands of students who struggle at home and in school. At the center of their struggles are often weak executive skills. Along with her colleague, Dr. Richard Guare, she has written numerous books on this topic for educators, mental health professionals, and parents. Among them, Smart But Scattered Teens, Executive Skills in Children and Adolescents, and Coaching Students with Executive Skills Challenges. Peg is also my co-author on Hill's new online Executive Skills Essentials course, which draws upon her amazing work. Peg, thanks for being here, and I am going to turn it over to you.
Okay, great, Kathy. Thank you. And I'm happy to be here and hope that I can give you some ideas this evening and that people have questions and comments afterwards to further the discussion.
Great.
Okay, so as I recall, and the title says, our task today is to talk about particularly emotional control and flexibility, which are two of the 11 executive skills which we feature in all of our work. And just to give a quick introduction to executive skills for people who may not be familiar with the term. I think of executive skills as the skills you need to get things done and to make the day go smoothly. We call them executive skills because they're the skills you need to execute tasks. But since we're talking about emotional control and flexibility, these are skills that not only come into play as we're engaged in academic tasks, but they are also, as importantly, the skills we need to get along with others and to adjust to changes and bumps in the road as they come along. So as I say, we're going to talk about two specifically. I'll sort of divide the time half and half between the two, emotional control and cognitive flexibility. A lot of the material from tonight's presentation comes from the book that we just produced the second edition of. It's called Smart But Scattered. And so if you want to know more about this, you can certainly find more in that book. And in case that's something you want to explore further. So let's start with emotional control. And let's just think about what we mean by that. So emotional control, there are different words for it. Some people prefer emotional regulation. And I think if we were actually starting all over again, we might use that description ourselves. But the definition fits any number of terms. It's the ability to manage emotions in order to achieve goals, complete tasks, or control and direct behavior. Now, one of the issues that I think people need to think about when they're thinking about their own child and where they fall on any kind of measure of executive skills is, and I get asked this question a lot from parents, should I be worried about how my child is behaving? or what my child's executive skills are at this age, or are they normal? And so we created a sort of ruler for assessing, for that parents could use to assess where their child may fall on a continuum. And so, in fact, this is from Smart But Scattered. And so, just to give, if there are parents in the audience who have a child that they think may struggle with emotional control, but they're not sure because they think it might be perfectly typical for a child of their age, I'm just going to quickly read through this measure. And with each item I read, and we've divided them into 4 ages. Is that right? Preschool, kindergarten, lower elementary, upper elementary, and middle school. And so as I read each question, think about this in relation to your child and think about how well the child exhibits this behavior. Okay, so if you're going to give it a numerical rating, 0 would be never or rarely. 1 would be does but not well, meaning about 25% of the time. 2 would be does fairly well, which is about 75% of the time. And 3 does very well, which is always or almost always. So that'll just give you a rough gauge. So if you have a child in preschool or kindergarten, think about this. Can your child recover fairly quickly from a disappointment or a change in plans? Can your child use non-physical solutions when another child takes a toy he or she was playing with? Can your child play in a group without becoming overly excited? So those are what we look for good emotional control at the preschool kindergarten level. Those are just examples. You can think of lots of other examples, I'm sure. At the lower elementary level, so think about this. Can your child tolerate criticism for an adult, such as a teacher reprimand? Can your child deal with perceived unfairness without becoming overly upset? And can your child adjust behavior quickly depending on the situation, such as calming down after recess? So that's what we would look for in a child in lower elementary school. And if they do those fairly well, like about 75% of the time, then they're probably in good shape for emotional control at that age. With upper elementary, which is grades 4 through 5, here's what we're looking at there. Does your child not overreact to losing a game or not being selected for an award? Can your child accept not getting what he or she wants when working or playing in a group? Can your child act with restraint in response to teasing? So again, if you would say, yeah, my child does that at least about 75% of the time, then again, they're probably in good shape. And then at the middle school level, and obviously you can see the behaviors are becoming more sophisticated and different as kids get older. But at the middle school level, can your child read reactions from friends and adjust their behavior accordingly? So they're being able to read the room and figure out how are people reacting to me? Oh, this kid's overreacting. Or getting really emotional. I better change my behavior. Can your child anticipate outcomes and prepare for possible disappointment? I have a test I'm getting back. I know I really, really want 100, but I have to be prepared. I might not get 100 on that test. And can your child be appropriately assertive, such as asking a teacher for help or inviting someone to dance at the school dance? Those would be examples of good emotional control at the middle school level. So especially when we wrote the second edition of Smart But Scattered, we had so many ideas for how to handle each executive skill. And I thought, okay, we got to find a place to start, because if I were a parent picking up my book, I might be overwhelmed by all the different possible strategies I could try. So with the 2 executive skills we're talking about this evening, I am going to start with a good place to start. And with emotional control, a good place to start is by letting your child know that you understand how they feel. Now, I should also warn you that if you have a child with significant problems with emotional control, there are very effective strategies out there, but nothing works fast. So, for instance, cognitive behavior therapy is an evidence-based approach to working with kids who struggle with their emotions. And a cognitive behavior therapy is based on the premise that our feelings are not caused by external events, but they're caused by what we tell ourselves about those external events. And so if we can reframe what we're telling ourselves, then we can manage the emotions better. And what's happening in the brain when we're feeling heightened emotions is that's when the amygdala kicks in. Okay, the amygdala is the fight, flight, or freeze part of the brain. It's one of the oldest parts of our brain. It goes back to prehistoric times when we were, as humans, we were confronted with much more frequently with real dangers than we are today. And unfortunately, the amygdala still acts like there's a lion chasing us whenever we get worried. But if we can understand how we're feeling, then we can decrease the activity in the amygdala and actually increase the activity in the frontal lobe. So that self-talk becomes a pathway to emotional control. So what does it sound like to let your child know you understand how they feel? You sound frustrated. Are you feeling lonely? How does that make you feel? With an older child, you may be able to say that. How does that make you feel? If a child shrugs and says, I don't know, then you can say, well, your face tells me you must be kind of angry. So you're just starting by acknowledging their feelings. And here's why this is important, because I think too often we skip this phase. When our child is upset, what do we want to do? We want to help them feel better. And so we jump in to reassure them, to say, it's okay, it's not that bad. We'll figure it out here. Why don't you try this? I bet you'll feel better. And we don't start by recognizing their feelings. And that can be very powerful. I'm sure most of you have seen this, but maybe not watched it in this slide. I'm going to share a clip from Inside Out, if you remember that movie, not the original movie, where two of the characters in here react to an elephant. I might as well at least get you the picture here, who's feeling very upset about something. And what I want you to watch for is the two different ways they respond to this elephant. I can't remember his name, this elephant's feelings. And by the way, Dan Siegel, who's a neuroscientist, I'm not sure exactly what he is, but this is his whole area of expertise. And he's the one who talks about what's going on in the brain and the amygdala and everything else. He has an expression for this, which I find really helpful. He says basically, name it to tame it. And so I want you to watch how that plays out in this little video clip.
Oh, the stuffed animal Hall of Fame! My rocket! Wait, Riley and I were still using that rocket. It still has some song power left. Who's your friend who likes to play? No, you can't take my rocket to the top. Riley and I are going to the moon. Riley can't be done with me.
Hey, it's gonna be okay. We can fix this. We just need to get back to headquarters. Which way to the train station?
I had a whole trip planned for us.
Hey, who's ticklish, huh? Here comes the tickle monster. Hey, Bing Bong, look at this. Oh, here's a fun game. You point to the train station and we all go there. Won't that be fun? Come on, let's go to the train station.
I'm sorry they took your rocket. They took something that you loved. It's gone. Forever.
Sadness. Don't make him feel worse.
Sorry.
It's all I had left of Riley.
I bet you and Riley had great adventures.
Oh, they were wonderful. Once we flew back in time. We had breakfast twice that day.
Sadness.
It sounds amazing. I bet Riley liked it.
Oh, she did. We were best friends.
Yeah, it's sad.
I'm okay now. Come on. The train station is this way.
How did you do that?
I don't know. He was sad, so I listened to what...
Hey! There's the train!
sounds so similar.
Ah, don't worry about it. Happens all the time.
I love this. And movies can make, whoops, sorry,
The stuffed animal.
movies can make everything work the way you wanted to, but wasn't that lovely? The way she understood what he was feeling, she acknowledged it, and he recovered. And he was ready to go on to the train station and actually ended up at that very end comforting her for something she was upset about. There are some other things to try if you're working with a child who struggles with emotional control, especially with young kids. Rather than trying to change the child, and of course, we want to get them to the point where they can manage their emotions more effectively, but we start by modifying the environment to reduce the likelihood that our kids are going to encounter situations where they struggle to manage their emotions. When we don't want to, again, we can go overboard with this, but with young kids, especially kids who are highly emotional, we can set up the environment to make it easier for them to sort of navigate their space. Lots of times kids who struggle with emotional control also struggle with sensory overload. So too much activity going on at once or too many sensations going on around them, loud noises, a lot of visuals, whatever, those can set them off. So we start by just minimizing that. And again, if you have a child who struggles with sensory overload, you know how you do that. You don't put them in situations where they're going to be overloaded unless you can't help it. Prepare your child in advance for difficult situations. So, you're taking your highly sensitive child to Disney World. And there's going to be so much excitement. And by the way, people who struggle with emotional control, they can struggle with strong positive emotions as much as they can struggle with strong negative emotions. So you talk with them in advance about here's what's going to happen when we get to Disney World. We're going to choose rides that we really want to do, but the lines are really long. So we're going to have to stand in line for a while. And we have to figure out, how can we spend our time when we're standing in line? So we prepare them in advance. There are going to be loud noises. There may be a baby crying. So let's think about how we're going to handle that. Help your child develop coping strategies. So if we're going to be in a line for half an hour, let's think about what we can do during that half an hour. Can we play a game? I see with my little eye, whatever the I Spy game is. I mean, there are things you can do to help your child manage waiting. In some cases, that's often hard for kids who struggle with emotional regulation. Or again, when they're hit with strong emotions, can we give them a coping strategy like let's take 10 deep breaths, or let's go to our happy place in our head. And you can help kids construct that happy place. For me, it would be the beach in summer, where I can just go and try to decrease my reactivity to what's going on around me. Help your child create a script for how they're going to handle a situation. If I get stuck, I can ask for help. If I get stuck, I can walk away and come back. So it's a script, something they can say to themselves, but it's also a coping mechanism. This is one of my favorites. Work with your child to talk back to bad feelings. And if any of you are familiar with a book by Lynn Lyons, she's one of the authors, I forget the other one, Anxious Parents, Anxious Kids, Anxious Kids, Anxious Parents, one of the two of them. This is one of her favorite strategies. Talk back to them. You're not the boss of me. It's when you start feeling that anxiety. You're not the boss of me. Go away. You can come back later, but right now I need to plow forward. And you can make a game out of that. But it's great if you can keep it something the kid could repeat. And you can get them to repeat it out loud with you. You can practice it. In fact, all of these things you can practice. You can do role playing. You can rehearse it. Okay, let's think about what's going to happen tomorrow. And if you feel overwhelmed with emotions, what do you think you can say to those emotions? You're not the boss of me. Something like that. Now, this next strategy is one I recommend for both parents and kids. mindfulness meditation. And there are some, I mean, again, this is another one like cognitive behavior therapy. There's a lot of research to show that if kids practice, or adults for that matter, practice mindfulness meditation, that over time they become more comfortable in their own skin, dealing with feeling. Actually, mindfulness, and I did not think about mindfulness at all until because I thought I'm not the kind of person who has mindfulness. And then I kept reading all these articles that say mindfulness has a real positive impact on any number of executive skills: flexibility, sustained attention, emotional control, among others. And so that's when I thought, okay, now I need to know how it works and why it works. So I've been probably doing daily mindfulness meditation for probably about 15 years now. And so I know it works. It's not something necessarily that kids want to do, but if we put them in a situation where they learn to do mindfulness, they often see the benefits. And one of my favorite books for kids in mindfulness is something called Sitting Still Like a Frog. I can't remember the author now, but it comes with a CD with guided meditations that you could, and each one lasts about 5 minutes or so. I think of it as a wonderful, let's relax before bedtime activity. Let's do a guided meditation. And one of the meditations is, what does it feel like to sit still like a frog? And it talks about how frogs need to sit very still in order to get their dinner, basically. But anyway, so check out that book. If you go to just Google mindfulness for kids, you'll come up with all sorts of strategies. But I actually think mindfulness is just as important for parents, especially if you're a parent of a child who struggles with their emotions. And I'm going to give you a small taste of this. This is a video I found years ago, and I tried to find it a while back and lost it. And then I went to my own history at YouTube and I found it again. So I'm going to show you this. It's called One Moment Meditation. And when I first discovered it, I was also just learning about mindfulness meditation myself. And I have 2 sons. And I think my older son, who was diagnosed with an attention disorder when he was 14, he was probably in his mid-20s at the time. And I kept thinking, and he also had a touch of anxiety. So I kept thinking, if I could get Aaron to try mindfulness, it really might make a difference. So I found this video and I showed it to him. We were all sitting around having dinner on vacation one year. And so I showed it to him over dinner. So I'm going to share it with you. It will talk about the whole approach, and then it will give you 1 minute of meditation for you to practice it. Okay, so hopefully you will practice it, because I think it's even with 1 minute, it's a really nice exercise. Okay, here goes.
Since you're watching this video, I'll bet you want to meditate, but don't have time. Maybe you've tried to meditate, but had some trouble. Maybe you had a wonderful experience meditating over there, but just can't find that same feeling over here. Well, my name is Marty Borison, and in this video I'm going to introduce you to the technique of one-moment meditation. Then you can meditate whenever you need to. Like when you're feeling stressed, or feeling angry. Maybe you're having trouble sleeping, or you're feeling anxious, or you just need a new idea. Although one-moment meditation is ultimately about meditating in a moment, we're going to start with a minute. We start with a minute because a moment goes by so quickly that it's very hard to notice. But a minute is like a moment with handles on it. You know where it begins and where it ends, so it's easier to grasp. If you're ready, we'll do the basic minute now. You might want to shut the door, or at least tell people you're not available for the next minute. You don't have to tie yourself in knots for this. Just sit with your legs planted firmly on the floor. Try to sit up straight, but don't be rigid. It's as if your head were being lifted up away from the weight of the world. Think of it as cosmic traction. Now put your hands in any position that's balanced, symmetrical, and still. Like this, or like this. During the minute, simply focus on your breathing, moment by moment. Of course, even in the space of a minute, you will get distracted. That's perfectly normal. It doesn't mean you're doing it wrong. But as soon as you notice that you're distracted, just think, and bring your mind back to your breathing. I'll ring a bell so you know when to start and when to finish. Ready? Then close your eyes. Oh, one more thing. It's okay to smile. And go. As you open your eyes, notice how you feel right now. Maybe a little bit refreshed, a little bit more awake, a little bit more open-minded. Not bad for a minute. And the more you do it, the better it gets. But please don't ever do the basic minute for longer than a minute. Don't be macho about it. Because the point of the basic minute is to show you that you can make a meaningful change in your state of mind quickly. So if you do it for longer, you're cheating. With 1 moment meditation, you can also learn how to do the portable minute, which is very useful when you're standing in line, on a train, or stuck in a boring meeting. You can also learn the bonus minute, the surprise minute, and the emergency minute. With 1 moment meditation, you can also learn how to reduce the length of the basic minute step by step until it only takes a moment. And when you can meditate in a moment, your whole day can be filled with meditation because it takes no time at all.
Okay. When have you ever sat in a webinar for 1 minute of silence? It's really a different way of thinking. I'm so glad I rediscovered that because the idea of a 1 moment meditation is just really lovely. I mean, I usually meditate for like 15 minutes a day, but the 1 moment, and that's something you could do with kids, right? You could take start with a minute, and then once you've practiced that, then you as he suggests, you can bring it down to a moment. When I shared this with my son, again, he was in his mid-20s at the time, had ADHD, and so we did the 1 minute meditation, and then I said to him, "So Aaron, what do you think?" And he said, "Okay, so for the first 15 seconds, I just wanted to scream." And he said, and after that, I kept telling myself, you can get through this. You can get through this. So he was using self-talk, right, to get through what felt very painful and uncomfortable to him. But I didn't give up with him. I then found the book by Dan Harris called 10% Happier, which is a very funny book about how he discovered meditation. And I sent it to my son as a Christmas present. He read the book. He's as faithful in terms of doing daily meditation as I am now, and in fact belongs to a meditation group where he lives in North Carolina. And so it may take time both for you and for your kids, but it's a good way of thinking about how to center yourself if your emotions are not in check or if your kids' emotions are not in check. Okay, so let's move on to flexibility. Whoops, let me get past this. Okay. These emotional control and flexibility are very similar. And I would have to say, when I think about it, most of the kids I know of who struggle, particularly the ones who struggle with flexibility, also struggle with problems with emotional control. So they sort of go hand in hand, but they're not exactly the same. Because flexibility is, well, you see the definition here, the ability to revise plans in the face of obstacles, setbacks, new information, or mistakes. It relates to an adaptability to changing conditions. So in a sense, flexibility is defined by what triggers it. Whereas emotional control, it may be triggered by the things that you see up here in the definition of flexibility, but it could be something else. It could be something, someone saying something mean to you. Or it could be triggered by, not feeling well in the morning. So emotional control has more triggers to it than flexibility does, but the outcome, is often the same. And in fact, I often say in my workshops for both parents and teachers that flexibility is an executive skill that sometimes lies beneath the radar. We see the behavior, but we may not realize that it started with inflexibility. So if you have trouble dealing with unexpected changes in plans, what happens when they occur? Your anxiety level rises. So what we see is the anxiety. We don't realize that it started with inflexibility. Or I think about kids with oppositional defiant disorder. When I think about those kids as a psychologist, I'm thinking about power struggles and control issues, and they're refusing to do what we've asked. But if you step back and say, what was the trigger? What led that kid to refuse to do what we asked? Very often, it was because someone was asking that kid to be more flexible than they were capable of being. And all they had was to manage that was their behavior. They didn't have the words. All they had was their behavior as a way of saying, I can't do that. This is looking at it from a slightly different angle, but I've had quite a few teachers of gifted kids tell me that gifted kids are often inflexible. And that's interesting to think about why that is. I mean, gifted kids, when I think about them, just in a nutshell, these are kids who can take in and understand quantities of very complex information and hold on to it, understand it, etc. But they're so used to being able to immediately grasp stuff that what if you hit them with something where that doesn't work for them? They often don't have the tools to know how to respond to that. So again, let's think about whether or not your child is normally flexible or maybe struggles with flexibility compared to other kids his age. So let's read through these. Again, the scale is if the child is never or rarely able to exhibit the behavior I'm going to read you, that would be a 0. Does but not well, that means they do it about 25% of the time. Does fairly well, about 75% of the time, or does very well, always or almost always. And again, I'm going to break it down in 4 age groups. Let's start with preschool and kindergarten. So a preschooler or kindergartner who's pretty flexible can adjust to changes in plans or routines, although they may need a warning. They recover quickly from minor disappointments. They're willing to share toys with others. So if you feel your child does that, about 75% of the time, they're in pretty good shape. At the lower elementary level, that's grades 1 through 3, there we expect flexible kids to be able to play well with others. They don't need to be in charge all the time. They can share. They're willing to take a back seat if need be. They tolerate redirection by teachers when not following instructions. They adjust easily to unplanned situations, like a substitute teacher, for instance. At the upper elementary level, that's grades 4 and 5, flexible kids Don't get stuck on things like disappointments or slights. They can shift gears when plans have to change due to unforeseen circumstances. They can do open-ended homework assignments, but they may need assistance. And then at the middle school level, flexible kids can adjust to different teachers, classroom rules, or routines. They're willing to adjust in a group situation when a peer is behaving inflexibly. Very often, if you have two inflexible kids trying to navigate a social interaction, that can be difficult. But if one of them is flexible, then they're willing in the moment to sort of adjust to that. They're willing to adjust to or accept a younger sibling's agenda, such as allowing him or her to select the movie the family's going to watch. Now, of course, you don't want kids to be so flexible that they're always willing to give in and be sort of passive acceptors of other people's leadership. But in the moment, in certain situations, you want them to be able to make that adjustment in order to achieve, whatever the long-term goal is, or achieve harmony in the moment, that kind of thing. Okay, so again, if your child at those various age levels is able to do that at least 75% of the time, they're in pretty good shape. And let's think about how to help kids who are inflexible. And we're going to start with what's a good place to start. And this is going to look familiar. Acknowledge your child's feelings. It's the same one for emotional control. So here's a couple of different examples. So use statements like this. You were really counting on the store having the toy you saved up money for. It's really disappointing when you work so hard for it and now the store doesn't have it. As opposed to saying, it's no big deal. I'm sure the store will get more within the next few days. That's not what the kid wants to see. That's the ultimate outcome. And hopefully the kid gets to that point where it's no big deal. But in the moment, they want people to understand how they're feeling in the moment. Okay, so let's look about whoops, what happened there? Other things to try. Oh, I went way backwards here. Sorry. Let me get back to where we were before. I'm working off of two screens here, and okay. So there's the good place to start. Now here's some other strategies. Again, make environmental modifications. Introduce change gradually rather than all at once, if you have the opportunity to do that. So if there are a number of changes in a child's life or schedule that they're going to have to deal with, if you can introduce one at a time rather than a bunch all at once, that helps. Give advance warning when things are going to change. And again, you'll see the overlap with emotional control. Walk your child through anxiety-producing situations and use expressions like, let's do this together. That idea of you and the kid together working on this can sometimes be a relief to kids. Okay, I'm not in this by myself. Someone's going to help me walk through this. Model flexible thinking. Use think alouds. And there's a great book, by the way. Oh, you'll see it on the next slide, where they give lots of scripts that parents can use that model thinking aloud. But one example might be, you get up in the morning and you were planning to make pancakes for breakfast. You open the refrigerator door, you see that you don't have any eggs, so you're going to have to rethink breakfast. So you open the door and say, oh, shoot, I don't have eggs. That means I'm not going to be able to make pancakes for breakfast. Let me see, what can we do instead? What's another thing we could have for breakfast that would be just as good as pancakes or almost as good that doesn't require eggs? Oh, guess what? I have some really nice granola I just made and some yogurt. How about we try that? I can, and you can use expressions like, I can be flexible. I'm going to be flexible here. I visited a school a while back where the teachers went out of their way to comment out loud to other teachers. Thank you for being flexible on this. So if, a teacher walked into a classroom to ask a favor of another teacher that involved a change in her schedule, when they negotiated it, the first teacher would say, I so appreciate you being flexible on this. So now kids are hearing, oh, being flexible is part of good social interactions. Help your child come up with a default strategy. something to do when when the inflexibility kicks in. The other thing, and I didn't put this here, but it's another thing to think about in terms of helping kids who are inflexible, is helping them understand how their body feels when they start feeling inflexible. And you can do the same thing with emotional control, because that's an early warning system. So if you feel your fists clenching, or you feel your breath getting faster or shallower, that means that something's bothering you. And so that would be the time to put in a coping strategy, like counting to 10, as opposed to when it goes all the way through you and it's too late to get yourself back there. Parents often talk about environmental modifications. Parents can often see when their kids are about to get upset. So it often starts with them recognizing it first and then quickly plugging in a coping strategy. But if you can teach kids to do that themselves, then that's also helpful. I'm thinking of just a quick story. A couple of years ago, I have two granddaughters, and one of them is, I think she herself would admit she's pretty inflexible. Although this is interesting, so I want to make this point too, because they're really sort of two different kinds of flexibility. There's cognitive flexibility and there's behavioral flexibility. And some kids have trouble with both of those, and some kids only struggle with one of them. And my granddaughter is one who, she doesn't have trouble with cognitive flexibility. She is the most amazing writer. I mean, she's only in sixth grade now, or she's in seventh grade now. She wrote, oh, this was so interesting. She wrote a paper last year for her English class about, and I forget what the topic was, something was upsetting to her, or something where she had to adjust to change or something like that. And she wrote about moving from Rhode Island to North Carolina when she was 4. And she's 12 writing this. And she wrote with such vivid detail. So first of all, what that tells me is that was really hard for her. That's change, right? And she's inflexible. But she wrote beautifully. And, I consider myself a writer, and I was writing diaries at that age, but my diaries were never as wonderfully written as hers were. So she has that kind of flexibility. It's the behavioral flexibility she struggles with. So a couple of years ago, they went to a fair. I think it may have even been in Raleigh. I'm not sure, because they live down the road from Hill Center. And it had one of those claw games where you could take a claw and capture a stuffed animal. And she wanted to do it because she saw one stuffed animal that she had her heart set on. She didn't get it. And fell apart after that. Wanted to go home. I hate it here. I don't want to be here. Let's go home. And really, it took her parents a while to calm her down. And I thought afterwards, I wonder how we could have prepared her for that, because you could see it coming, right? So I'm thinking maybe the way to prepare her, and I'm sure her parents do this at other times, but if they had said to her, okay, Violet, we can do that. You can play this game, but guess what? There's a good chance you won't be able to get the animal you want. So let's talk about how you're going to react. What can you say to yourself when the time is up and you didn't get the stuffed animal that you wanted? So you prepare in advance, right, for possible disappointment. There's a great curriculum, but there's also books by the same author, and actually the curriculum includes some parent pieces to it. The curriculum is called Unstuck and on Target. The book that goes along, that's very similar to the curriculum, is Solving Executive Function Challenges. The subtitle of that book is Some Ways to Get Kids with Autism Unstuck and on Target. And if you have a child on the autism spectrum, you know that this kind of inflexible thinking is really one of the defining features of autism spectrum disorder. But I will tell you that you can be inflexible and not be on the spectrum. My granddaughter's that way. She's nowhere near falls on the spectrum, but she's pretty inflexible. So that's something to keep in mind. I remember when I had my clinical practice, people would bring in their kids and say, my sister-in-law thinks my son has autism spectrum disorder. because it became such a sort of common conversation piece a few years ago. And when I would evaluate the child, they did not meet the diagnostic criteria for autism spectrum disorder, but they were inflexible. So, and as this is one of my weaker skills too, so I can tell you, you can be inflexible, but not necessarily on the autism spectrum. But they have the book, Solving Executive Function Challenges, and the curriculum, which has a home component as well. In fact, I just remembered, if you go to their website, Unstuck and on Target, they actually have an online course that parents can take to learn how to manage inflexible kids better. And I would recommend that. In fact, the people who created this program also do research to determine whether the program is effective. And when they started doing those parent trainings, they compared, online training to in-person training in terms of the outcomes for parents, and they found it was just as effective teaching an online class. So again, if you have a child who struggles with this, I would recommend check out their website. They also have little videos. I should have imported one, where they raise a problem that parents often encounter with inflexible kids and just give them some pointers. Here's how you could handle that. I forgot about that. But here's some of the things they talk about. Yeah, and a lot of these are sort of self-talk or mantras or whatever you can give kids to help them. When flexible, more good things happen. We can be flexible and make a plan B. I love how you were flexible. Or unstuck. Being stuck feels bad. Getting unstuck feels better. I'm getting stuck on whatever. How can I get unstuck? Since you got unstuck, you now have more choices. Plan A, plan B. I like talking about plan A and plan B. I also like talking about, so do you have a backup plan? Let's say your daughter has in her mind, she's having a sleepover this weekend. She's going to invite her best friend. She's got all sorts of fun things they're going to do together, but she hasn't invited the friend yet. So if you were her mom, you might say to her, whoa, what if your friend's not available? We better have a backup plan. She may be away this weekend. So what's our backup plan? What other fun things could we do? In terms of compromise, both people have to be flexible to compromise. So teaching kids how to compromise and the value of compromise helps inflexible kids. Let's compromise so we both get some of what we want, which is an interesting way to, when you have a conflict with a child, they want to do something and you don't want them to do it, or it's not possible. See if you can come up with a compromise, because now you're teaching compromise. Something is better than nothing. I also like big deal, little deal. Is that a big deal or a little deal? And I was reading their advice today. They said, never tell a kid who thinks something is a big deal that it's a little deal, but then say, how can we turn this big deal into a little deal? I visited a school a few years ago, and a teacher invited me to spend the morning in her class to see what she was doing on executive skills. And it was middle school. And this kid, 7th or 8th grader, came into the class at the beginning of the period, clearly upset about something. And the teacher calmed him down and he explained what it was he was upset about. And she said, is that a big deal or a little deal? And he said, it's a big deal. And she's had a different way of going at it. She said, is it a big deal or is it a little deal that feels like a big deal? And he said, it's a little deal that feels like a big deal. So there's a kid who's adjusting the idea that not all deals are big. Choice, no choice, helping kids understand that. And this is, again, where you can have good conversations with kids. Some things there aren't any choice. They don't have a choice. The example they give there, taxes for adults, fire drills for kids. But when they do have a choice, so help them distinguish between, is this a choice situation? And let me help you make a choice. Or is this, unfortunately, a no choice situation? And so how are we going to get through it? And then finally, I just have a few more things to suggest here. If you have young kids, I've got a bunch of picture books I'd recommend, picture books and read-alouds. At the end of this, I have a QR code that people can take a picture of, and you can download this presentation. My Julia Cook does a lot of good books on executive skills. My Mouth is a Volcano, obviously, with a child who has trouble controlling their temper. Wilma Jean, The Worry Machine. Again, that's Julia Cook, and now we're talking about anxiety. Alpha Breaths, which is a book of different kinds of breathing meditations. Of course, It's a Big Deal by Brian Smith, who's one of my favorite authors. I'll talk about a bit more about him in a minute. With Flexibility, there's a book called Ish. It's nice-ish. It's sort of that middle ground. The Girl Who Never Made Mistakes. I love this story because I was one of those kids it's not that I never made mistakes, but I hated it when I made mistakes. And so this walks a girl through making a mistake for the first time in her life, basically. I mean, that's the humor of the story, and recovering from it. And not having her world melt around her just because she made a mistake. Stuck is another book. My Day is Ruined by Brian Smith, and What's Your Choice by Brian Smith. What I like about the Brian Smith stories, first of all, they're very quick and readable. My Day is Ruined, the subtitle is A Story for Teaching Flexible Thinking. And it just describes it usually the kid, Brian, no, what's the kid's name? Braden. Braden is at like third, fourth grade. So you could use it with kids in that age range. You could probably use it with younger kids, and always starts with a situation where there's a problem. So for instance, or actually it describes a number of different situations. And then walks the kid through, okay, how could we handle that? I know that wasn't what you wanted. My day is ruined. And so what can we do instead? And the other thing, and I don't know whether this would be helpful or not, but I like it. It basically for each book, it comes up with, okay, here's 4 things we could do. So for flexible thinking, number 1, take a deep breath. Number 2, realize some things are out of your control. Number 3, change your plan. Number 4, accept the change. And then the other one, what was it? Yeah, of course, It's a Big Deal. So this was the one for emotional control. And there, the story is Braden is going to, I think this is it. Yeah, they go to like a go-kart track where, or one of the bumper car track, and it turns out they won't let him ride his own bumper car because he's not tall enough. He doesn't meet the height standards, which is the age standard, right? And he completely falls apart. He can go in the go-kart, or the bumper car, but he has to be with an adult. He doesn't want to do that. So it's he and his mom and dad sort of working through, how do I handle this? What can I do instead? And again, they come down with, and it'll sound very similar to you. And this too, it's a big deal. I hate this place. I just want to get out of here. So the 4 steps to reacting calmly. Number 1, calm down. You can take deep breaths or count to 10. Number 2, think of a way to make the situation better. Number 3, try it out. Number 4, if nothing works, or if you can't figure out what to do, get help. And then the final suggestion I would have, there are games that you can play. And a lot of these games were actually, if you're familiar with the Fletcher School, these were developed by the people who work at the Fletcher School as a handout for parents. And so these are a bunch of games for flexibility. Oh, I skipped emotional control. Let me go back. Inside Out, I think that's based on the movie. Emotions and Actions game, Feelings in a Jar, Sorry, Chutes and Ladders, or virtually any game where you have to learn how to react and accept the fact that you're losing, right? Or you may be losing. And then for flexibility, these are just some more games. Apples to Apples is one that I have I just recently played it with my 2 granddaughters. And they did really well with it, actually. I think this is more cognitive flexibility. This is my daughter-in-law, Violet, cognitive flexibility is her strength. It's behavioral flexibility she struggles with. So she did really well with Apples to Apples, where you're given cards, disparate cards, and you have to figure out some way to connect them in a way that makes some sense, even though they're 2 very disparate concepts. You may be familiar with some of those others. Okay, and so finally, this is um, the QR code. It should bring you to my PowerPoint. It's in a Dropbox folder, and you can either view it right there or you can download it to your computer. And I think if you download it, you can watch those little videos again, that 1 minute mindfulness or the Inside Out clip. Okay,
All
and
right. Hey,
now the
thank you
Q&A
so
section.
much.
Yeah.
We have some really amazing questions that came
Oh,
in.
cool. I
Um,
I can answer them.
okay, hopefully. You alluded to this a little bit and shared a great resource, but I wonder if you have anything you want to add. This participant was asking, would any of the emotional regulation strategies that you're suggesting be changed or implemented differently if you're working with a student who is on the autism spectrum?
Oh, interesting question. No, I don't think so, but I do think, and I'm wondering if the person asking this question might be thinking this, because kids on the spectrum are not always as in touch with their feelings as, as other kids. So certainly, if you ask them how they're feeling, they may have trouble answering that question. So
Mhm.
those are kids. Oh, and yeah, here's another thing. Great question. Now that I think about it. A- Rather than asking kids open-ended questions, is if you give them choices. Gee, I wonder if I've got a couple ideas of what went on there. Do you think this happened or this happened?
Mhm.
And also giving them choices around solutions rather than asking them to come up with ideas on their own.
Yeah, the
Yep.
participant has rung back in and said, "Yep, communication barriers
Yeah.
are a factor with this."
Yeah. And one of the suggestions I often make to parents who have kids on the spectrum is to model your thought process. So
Mhm.
that they can see how you're thinking. So, for instance, I remember years ago, I tested a fifth grader who was on the spectrum, and his mom told me, just sort of in passing, that every week he had the same spelling assignments. He got the spelling packet on Monday, it was due on Friday. And she said, he does some of those spelling assignments without any trouble, and then he falls apart over others. And then she started giving me examples. So Monday he has to write each spelling word 10 times. He doesn't have any trouble with that, as you can imagine. Tuesday, he has to look up each word in the glossary or the dictionary and write down the definition of the word. He doesn't have any trouble with that. On Wednesday, what do you think he had to do on Wednesday?
Right sentences.
Take each sentence, spelling word, put it in a sentence. Bam, fell apart. And I remember that mom saying to me, somewhat sheepishly, she said, so I just feed him the sentence. I say, here, write this. And she was feeling bad about it, but she also knew she could make that kid sit at the kitchen table till midnight and he wouldn't be able to write the sentences. So I
Sure.
said to her, that's okay. You can feed him the sentences, but here's how you do it. Let him know your thought process so he understands how you're thinking about it. And then I model it because I'm sure she didn't know what I was talking about. So I might say, oh, let's see, the spelling word's beautiful. Where am I going to start? Well, let me think about what beautiful means. Oh, it means pretty. Okay, so what are some things that are beautiful? Roses are beautiful. There's my sentence. And you can model different ways of thinking, although the more uniform, for that particular thing, if you always start with, well, let me think about what the word means, that's sort of an entree for the kid and that can
Mhm.
expand out their thinking. So that think aloud piece, I think, can really help kids on the spectrum over time.
Yeah. Yeah, and I appreciate you using that terminology, the think aloud part. Really, it's sharing your thoughts out loud.
Right.
Um, Another question, what would be a suggestion for a child who maybe is resistant to really trying some of these strategies? They're just sort of resistant to strategies, so you really can't even get traction.
Yeah. First of all, reflect their feelings. You think this is a dumb idea, right? I mean, what? Uh, and then see if you can strike a deal with them. Or the other approach I often like is let's just do this as an experiment. Okay, we'll do an experiment. We'll try it once. You let me know how it works. If it doesn't work, we won't do it again. Or say the other thing that we often suggest when making suggestions to kids around strategies is we start by asking permission. I have a couple of thoughts about how to solve that problem. Um, is it all right if I share them with you? And more often than not, even kids who are resistant are because you've asked, they may be more open to the idea of accepting your suggestions. But the more you can partner with the kid and say, this is not me telling you what to do. Let's tweak this so that it's your strategy. And then the other, and this is a longer term solution, but I'm a big believer in data. And I'm not thinking about this as much with emotional control, but very often, I've got kids who, they won't write down their homework assignments. They think they'll just remember the assignment. And so rather than pushing them to write down their homework assignments, you say, okay, let's do an experiment. For the next week, you don't have to write down your homework assignments. Let's find out. Let's see how many you missed. You forgot to hand in because you didn't, or you forgot to do because you didn't write them down. And after a week or 2 weeks, you can say, okay, 2 days out of 5, you didn't get your homework done because you thought you were going to remember it and you didn't remember it. So what's the solution here? What can we do to, and then again, when you hit them with the data, they may be more willing to think about, an alternative solution.
Yeah, more factual, maybe sometimes less emotion is better. Um,
Right.
what about if a child's inflexibility seems situational? For example, they show great flexible thinking at school with friends, and then at home they appear to be just incapable of being flexible.
So yeah, whenever I hear stories like that, I'm thinking, well, at least it's not the other way around.
Right? Yeah.
Right? So be happy that your child is behaving flexibly at school. Home is a safe space. Home is where kids can let down and let go of, and a lot of inflexible kids are working really hard to hold it together at school.
Mhm.
And so sometimes what you're seeing is they just can't hold it in any longer. I remember I had a mom a few years ago told me that her daughter had trouble with emotional control. She managed to get through the school day so well that her teacher said she doesn't have any trouble. But that mom would meet her daughter at the bus stop every day when she got home from school. As she's climbing off the bus, she's in tears. So the school, I think, wanted to say, oh, it's all the mom's fault. No, the mom could see this was her letting down uh, because she just couldn't hold it in anymore. And actually,
Mhm.
with that kid, what the school arranged to do was to give her, she could spend the last like 15 minutes with the school counselor as a sort of decompression, to get to sort of let the day, get off her chest, whatever she needed to get off her chest, and sort of it ended up being the separation between school and home, and she could go home and she was in better shape.
That's wonderful. That's a great way to make that transition.
Yeah. But I do think,
Yeah,
and
go
let me
ahead.
just, the one other thing I wanted to say about that
Yeah,
is just again to acknowledge, I mean, this is tough for you, I know. And I mean, sooner or later, you don't want to forgive kids for impossible behavior at home, even though it started from them, having a tough day at school. They do need to learn how to behave, and that's where the problem solving comes in. Let's talk about another way we can handle this so that you and I don't end up screaming at each other, or so
right.
you don't end up slamming doors.
Yeah, let's be transparent about the impact this is really having and talk solutions. Yeah. Any particular tips for working with students who have perfectionist tendencies so they can become emotionally dysregulated pretty quickly when they make an error? And maybe we're launching back to those students who are thought of as academically and intellectually gifted.
Hmm. I, and that's such a good question. In fact, I start my workshops now very often with just pointing out. I have in my workshops, I have all the like teachers. I did it today. Teachers take the executive skills questionnaire for themselves. They
Yeah.
evaluate, assess their own executive skills, and then I have them talk with each other about what are your stronger skills? How do you use them in your work? What are your weaker skills? How do you work around them? Or have you figured out compensating strategies? And after they've done this for about 10 minutes, I sort of stop everybody and I said, I love starting my workshop this way because it begins with a lot of laughter. And my guess is you're not laughing about what you're good at. You're laughing about what's hard for you. And I said, that is such a good reminder for us in an age where there's such pressure not to make mistakes and such pressure to be perfect, that if we can model that for kids, that that not everything comes easy to us too, and that um, some things do and some things don't, and we learn from our mistakes, etc. I have to admit though, because especially when I was growing up, I had some of those perfectionist tendencies, and I think it's probably not chance that I ended up working with kids with ADHD as opposed to kids with perfectionism, because kids with ADHD, I'm trying to tool them up and get them to care a little more about their work. But with kids who are perfectionists, when they're telling, oh, but this was terrible, I'm thinking, yeah, that was terrible, because that was terrible for me when I was a kid, and that's not good.
Yeah.
Um, so again, some of those, read The Girl Who Couldn't Make Mistakes. That was one of the books that I just really liked about that, and have conversations with kids about this.
Mhm.
There's so many sort of facile things we can say to them that they won't absorb. We can say to them, well, the only way is you learn is through mistakes. What kid
Right.
ever wants to hear that?
Because that translates to me having to redo work more often, which I don't like. Yeah.
Exactly. Do you have ideas for that, Kathy?
I was just thinking about that myself. My daughter had a little bit of a tendency towards that when she was in second grade, and the teacher pointed it out. And it wasn't until I realized I tried really hard to not, get things wrong. And probably when I was frustrated, one of my areas of struggle is reading a map. That is not my gift. And so I let it become frustrating. I was showing frustration when I struggled with something, and I realized I had passed that along to her. I had modeled that for her.
Yeah.
And so I had to talk with her and dial that back myself so that she understood that I could be light about it, that I could struggle with something and that was okay. There was a workaround, there was a solution.
Yeah, that's a nice way to handle that. I remember a few years ago, again, testing a kid who had some perfectionist tendencies, and the parents were saying, we don't understand why he is this way. We keep telling him it's okay to make mistakes, and we don't expect you to be perfect. And I remember saying, and at the time I was, and now I think back, what made me say this? But I said to him, when I work with kids who are perfectionists, very often I find there's another family member who has that same perfectionist tendency. And they looked at each other and said, oh, yeah,
Yeah.
we don't hold our kids to a high standard, but we hold ourselves to a high standard. And that is what our kids are seeing. So,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
I think the counteract, the way you handled it is great. And the other way is to, whenever you do make mistakes,
Mhm.
acknowledge it, say, oh, I made a mistake. Let me think, what am I going to learn from this? And oh, this kind of makes me mad, but I know that. So again, you model you handling making mistakes in a way that doesn't make you upset.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Is there an age at which kids can begin or handle meditation?
Hmm. Probably just about any age. Again, my son and his family who live in Hillsborough, there's a meditation center in Hillsborough, and
Yeah.
they started going when their kids were preschoolers. The kids didn't always want to go, but they had a good time when they got there. And I remember someone, I was doing some work in Canada, and someone from Vancouver was talking about how they were doing meditation with first graders. And they did something right after lunch to sort of calm down, manage that transition from recess to the afternoon. And one day there was a substitute teacher, and one of the kids went to the substitute teacher and said, so do you know mindfulness meditation? And the teacher said, I'm sorry, I don't. And they said, that's okay. We know, we can lead the group. So they
I
did.
love it. I love
So
it. At
you can
6.
do it as
That's
young
so
as,
cool.
yeah, is at first grade. There's probably no age at which you can't probably do something around that.
Exactly. Right. Um, Last question for you. When emotional control or lack thereof is paired with teen hormones, and so they gave an example. A child appears perfectly happy, ask their mom to do their hair. They see the finished product, become enraged because it's not exactly what they want, and then they're in tears, and then they're angry, and then what's the parent response in that roller coaster moment that we know happens and it's not something we can control, but what's the response?
Yeah, so there are two different responses. One is in the moment, and one is, at a later time when everybody's calmed down, maybe the next day talking about what happened yesterday. In the moment, you don't want to um, push anything, other than maybe commenting on it or, is there anything I can do to help? But the person who asked that question is absolutely right because whether it's hormones or dopamine or whatever, things change during adolescence, and kids go from 0 to 60 um, faster than when they're younger. The one thing that I've also read about what's going on with teenagers is that not only are they more emotional, but they also respond more quickly and more volatility to the emotions of others.
Mhm.
So I often say to parents, and I always say it with this like wry laugh. I said, I could never pull this off myself because my kids know how to push my buttons. But if you can respond calmly when your kids like fly off the handle, it's probably going to go a little better than if you fly off the handle too, because then you're both feeding off each other.
Yeah, it's one of the few times where you don't want to meet them right where they are.
Yeah, exactly. Good point. That's a good point. Yeah,
All
yeah.
right. Well, any suggestions for teachers who have a young student having big feelings during lessons and it disrupts the whole class? I would imagine more than likely this person sort of has to handle that in the moment as well as make sure these folks are okay. So,
Yeah, so a couple of suggestions, and one is for this you would have to look at our book. We developed a strategy called a hard times board. And my colleague Dick did. He was working with an autism specialist because kids with autism often struggle with this. But any kid who responds with emotionality, and the hard times board is basically, um, and you can use any emotion you want, but let's take mad. I get mad when, and then you and the kid decide. In the example that I often use in my workshops was it was a kid that Dick was working with. I get mad when I have to do any kind of writing.
mhm,
So that's the top. There's three levels to the hard times board, or two. I'll give examples of each. And then the next level is what are the can't do's? What can't I do? I can't scream. I can't run around the classroom. I can't rip up my paper. And then what can I do? When I am feeling this way, I can. And the two strategies that were really go-to strategies for Dick was I can take a break for 2 minutes and look at a book and draw, or I can ask for help. And in fact, with the kids on the spectrum that he was working with, that boiled down to help break. Do I need
mhm,
help, or do I need to take a break? And
yeah.
so a lot of it is preparing in advance with the kid in the moment. All you can do is however you handle it in a way that doesn't, I mean, sometimes it means removing the child from the classroom. But if you can prepare in advance, and I was in Charlotte, North Carolina yesterday at a school there, and a kindergarten teacher talked about a kid who really fell apart whenever the timer went off. So the teacher would say, okay, we have 5 minutes to do this activity. And when the timer goes off, we're going to switch to something else. That timer just totally set that kid off. And so
Mhm.
we were talking about, so what are some options? How could we help this kid prepare for this? And it was so many, and it was a whole group of us sitting around trying to talk about this, and people were throwing out suggestions, and she kept saying, well, I did that. I tried that. It worked one day. It didn't work the next day. The piece I realized that was hardest to get across is all of those strategies work better if it if you're being collaborative with the kid. So rather than you saying, okay, here's what I'm going to try now, we say, let's talk about how the timer really sets you off. And let's talk about, is there some other sound we could use? Because, and I understood what this teacher was saying, helping kids learn how much time it takes to do something. That was how she structured her classroom. She needed those time breaks in there.
Well, and that's a skill, right? That
Yeah,
is an EF
yeah,
skill right there.
yeah. But is there so you work out it, you talk with the kid about it, you work out what else could we do instead? And see, and it's not just try this strategy, it's like with the kid, because that's when the kid feels, first of all, he's consulted. And second of all, he has some say in whatever the strategy is. So
Huge, right?
yeah, it is. And I think we tend to be, because as adults, teachers, we're problem solvers. We want to go in and solve the problem, make the situation better. but sometimes it's better if we involve the kid in helping us solve the problem.
Yeah, I know in the EF course that we did that we're offering now here at Hill Online, one of the things that we have in there is it's a video that really shows how a teacher has constructed just a calming space within the classroom
Oh,
so
that's
that she
a good
can
idea. We
still
didn't
keep
talk
that
about
visual.
that, but that would have been great. Yeah.
Right. But it's the same thing that you were saying Dick was doing in terms of reading or drawing. I was just flashing to that kid who's going to go, I don't want to do that, you know. And so it just gives them, you know, you've got maybe some building bricks in there, you kinetic sand,
Yeah.
you know, and they have to set a timer. Speaking of timers, and you know, you've got this long to sort of get yourself back together. And that's a great thing to set up.
Yeah, I wish I thought of that yesterday. That would have been a good idea.
There you go. We got to go on the road together, Peg.
Yeah, right.
Well, Peg, thank you so much for your partnership and your time this evening. I am so excited that our course is available now.
Yeah.
So to our community members, thank you for your time and engagement tonight. If you'd like to learn more about executive function professional development, including our new online course or our offerings for students, visit hillcenter.org. I know my buddy Dara put some links in the chat that you can use, and you'll also get them in the email that you're going to receive tomorrow. That'll have the recording and the slides and all of that. So thank you all for being here. Thank you, Peg, so much, and have a wonderful evening, everyone.
Okay, great. Thank you. Whoops.